Hey guys, so my case study 4 is on trauma informed teaching. So the critical questions here are what is trauma and how can we use strategies in our classroom to help students that have experienced trauma? So this slide is about identifying trauma. So trauma can be broken into 8 categories, including threat to life or limb, severe harm or injury, including sexual assault, receipt of intentional injury or harm, exposure to the grotesque, violent, sudden loss of a loved one, witnessing or learning of violence to a loved one, learning of exposure to a noxious agent, and causing death or severe harm to another. So obviously these are general and very broad categories, and there's a lot within those that we have to be aware of. But these are just some ways to identify it so that we can be aware of it in our students. So this is a big fact. 35 million kids in the United States have experienced at least one or more types of serious childhood trauma, according to a survey by NSCH. I've also found a couple other facts like this that are like 50% have experienced their anxiety disorders before age 8. I've also seen a lot that are about like 2/3 of US children have experienced at least one type of serious childhood trauma, such as abuse, neglect, natural disaster, or experiencing and witnessing violence. And another fact that 1 out of every 4 children attending school has been exposed to a traumatic event. So clearly, this is very common, and something that's important is to always assume that your students have experienced trauma instead of assuming that they haven't, because it's actually going to hurt them in the long run rather than if you just use the same techniques on students that haven't experienced trauma. So first of all, know the signs. So like we talked about the types of trauma, some physiological signs are appetite issues, weight changes, exhaustion, frequent illness, and poor hygiene. So especially if any of these are sudden changes, that's a big red flag to trauma happening at home. And they often show distress through aggression, avoidance, shutting down, or other off-putting and unexpected behaviors. So if you have a child that is portraying some very unexpected, some very out of color responses, sometimes it's not because they want to just act out, and mostly all of the time it's not because they want to act out. It's because maybe they're not getting attention at home or there's trauma happening at home and they can't focus on what you're asking them to do at the time. So, neurobiologically, students cannot learn if they don't feel safe, known, and cared for within their schools. So, students actually have to have this social and emotional healing from their teachers and feel cared about and valued by them if they're going to learn at all. Even if you have the best curriculum in the world and you're the best teacher in the world, you cannot reach through to them if they do not have these basic needs met. So what can teachers actually do to help? Expect unexpected reactions, and a lot of times I realize that teachers try to ignore these, and that's actually the opposite of what you're supposed to do, because then it makes them feel like they're not being heard at all. So sometimes obviously all of the time, don't take these responses personally, because a lot of times students can act out in anger, even if they're not angry with you. So that's something to be aware of. And then also when you're responding to them, just make sure that you have thoughtful interactions with them, because if you try to make demands at them, it's going to come off as being aggressive and they're going to go into defense mode. So that brings us to the second one of employ thoughtful interactions. So with this one, it's changing the way that we give directions. So instead of doing demands like put your chair away, it's more along the lines of like, could you please push in your chair because we don't want people to trip on it that are trying to pass by to get to the art station. It's stuff like that. When you give them a reason, then they understand why they're being asked to do it, and it's giving them almost like a sense of choice and leadership within themselves, a lot less like they're being controlled. So give them some of the control too. And give them time to comply to the directions, because sometimes they're not going to get it right away. and that's fine, and we have to be aware of that. So number 3, be specific about relationship building. If I've learned anything from this case study, it's relationships are very important to a classroom. If you want to get through to a student, you're going to need to build a thoughtful relationship with them. And this doesn't mean knowing them as a student, it means knowing them as a person first. So one technique that I saw that I really liked was the 2x10 rule. So talking to the student for 2 minutes a day, 10 days in a row, about something that is not related to academics or their behavior. It must be something that's personal in their lives that they like. Maybe it's superheroes, maybe it's comic books, maybe it's dance class. It's something that isn't directly related to their academics. You get to know them on a personal level before the student level. So number 4, promote predictability and consistency. This means letting them know when things are changing in the classroom, because sometimes it's overwhelming to come into a space that you feel is safe and is reliable, and then it gets changed on you. Maybe they don't expect their daily agenda to change, so let them know beforehand so that they feel ready and prepared for it. So that brings us to number 5, teach strategies to change the channel. So a lot of times when students are overwhelmed, we send them to a start over chair or to a timeout to calm themselves down. But when they're over there, they're not necessarily actually doing any healing. They might just be thinking negative thoughts to themselves about what's going on at home, and that's not really helping them. So it's important to do things like maybe there's ad libs over there, maybe there's games over there, maybe there's music over there, mental distractions that don't let them think about what's going on at home. Let them think about something else to get their mind off of it so that they feel ready to come back to class. Which brings us to number 6, give supportive feedback to reduce negative thinking. So some thoughtful interactions here might be smiling at them more, might be telling them when you're happy with them. It could mean doing a compliment sandwich. So if you have to give them negative feedback, start with a positive, go to a negative, end with a positive so that they feel better about it. And then create islands of confidence. So recognizing their areas of strength is a very big one, and letting them have leadership in those areas makes them feel very confident in themselves. And then limiting exclusionary practices. So respond to their anger by validating their feelings. So if they act out in a chair is thrown, maybe that's very severe, I know, but it's a possibility in classrooms. Maybe come towards them with the "I'm sorry you are upset, I see that you're angry," instead of yelling, because that could trigger traumatic memories for them, and it's only going to hurt them even more in the long run. I know this is a very long video, so I'm going to wrap it up, but remember to assume that your students have experienced trauma and need social and emotional learning, instruction, and support. This is going to help them in the long run, even if they haven't experienced trauma. Everybody can benefit from it, so why not include it? As teachers, we need to focus on the individual student and the strong one-to-one relationships that support our trauma-affected kids, which is 100% true. Like I said, get to know them as a person before you get to know them as a student academically. Creating these bonds required a broader cultural adjustment and prioritization where the whole community works together to cultivate a space in which students, educators, and staff members thrive. So this social and emotional learning, or this trauma-informed teaching, doesn't just happen in the classroom. This can be a school-wide thing where it doesn't matter who it is, as long as the student has a trusted adult, it's going to help them. And it's going to help even more if this is a school-wide project as well, so that the teacher doesn't feel like they're battling this by themselves. We also need to remember that trauma can happen to children of all ethnicities, backgrounds, and socioeconomic levels. So just because everything seems great on the outside does not mean everything is okay on the inside. And also take care of yourself. This is very hard on teachers. We're taking in a lot of secondary trauma from these students, and it's important to take care of ourselves so we can really be there for them effectively. I'm going to wrap this up by letting you know about a TED Talk that I really enjoyed that I heard by Dr. Meredith Fox on this, and she went into detail about her experiences with trauma. Her sister was murdered when she was 11 years old. Her sister was 20 at the time. Her mother passed away 5 years later, and she had one teacher that was there for her and was her trusted adult. and it was actually in her least favorite class, but that teacher was so special to her and she understood and took the time to get to know her, opposed to her high school teachers that didn't understand, didn't take the time to get to know her, and didn't care. And that was a big problem for her. And I won't get too much into detail, but I think you should really check it out. And I have the link in the works cited, which I have right here, and pictures, obviously. But thank you. I hope that you got a lot from this, and thanks.